fund for morphic resonance research from individuals who have been good enough to try and help this process along. And this money really has helped it along, because it has made it possible to hire people to do these experiments in labs, in universities, and there are quite a number of universities ready and willing to do them. And the only limiting factor at the moment is money to hire the people to do them. We're hiring students in the summer vacation to do these projects, because that way we can get a 3 to 4 month project done for $1,500. Yes?
I don't know if I'm the only one in the audience who really doesn't grasp what the theory of morphogenetic resonance is, but I'd appreciate a couple of sentence description.
Yes, quite right. Well, I should have said that at the beginning. All right.
Both those. Thanks.
The theory, sorry about that, I was assuming that most people did know, and I should have realized that not everybody would, and maybe most don't.
Something intrigues me about it, but I don't grasp it.
Well, it's hard to grasp in its detailed forms, but that's what our dialogue was going to be about, and some of these things. But basically what it's saying is that the so-called laws of nature are like habits, that things happen the way they do because they've happened that way before. The way crystals crystallize depends on the way the same compound has crystallized in the past. The way rats learn a new trick depends on whether other rats have learned it before. If rats in another place have already learned it, then it'll be easier to learn somewhere else for subsequent rats by the process called morphic resonance. So there's a kind of collective memory in nature, in different species, in different kinds of things. And this collective memory is transferred from the past to the present by the process I call morphic resonance. And that means that in general, new things which happen repeatedly should happen more and more easily, or more and more quickly, or more and more probably as time goes on, because of the effect, the build-up of this morphic resonance. And this theory is controversial, as Terence pointed out, because it's not the way that scientists usually think about these things. And the issue that I've just been discussing is various experimental ways to test it, because this theory says when proteins fold up a new way and do it repeatedly, they should do it quicker. And when some people have learned something in one country, like on television in a hidden image, it should make it easier for others to spot it elsewhere. Or if fruit flies have developed in a new way, for example with extra veins in their wings, then the more that do it, the easier it should get for others to do it, other things being equal. And that's the point of all these experiments I've been describing. They're all designed to test this theory, to see whether there is in fact this kind of memory or habit in nature. There's one more aspect of the theory that I should mention, which is that it leads to a completely new interpretation of memory. And it says that our ordinary memories of what we've done, depend not on traces or physical material changes stored in the brain, like traces on a tape recorder or recordings in a hologram. It doesn't depend on a material storage system in the brain. Rather, memory depends on tuning in to our own past directly by morphic resonance. And the brain's more like a tuning system than a storage system. Damage to the brain can interfere with the tuning or the reception, and so you can get loss of memory through brain damage, but the memory isn't in the brain. And just as we tune into our own memories from our own past, so we also tune into the memories of large numbers of other people, and this is similar as a notion to what Jung called the collective unconscious. So that's a summary of what it's all about. And the experiments I've just been talking about were in response to Terence asking for an update on the experimental test situation. So that's more or less what's been going on so far in the way of experimental tests. And more are in the pipeline, and the limiting factor at the moment is funds, and some funds are becoming available. So that's where we are from that point of view.
Yes, I might say about all this, to my mind, the criticism of the theory has to this point been fairly inane and largely carried out by people who didn't really understand the theory. that doesn't mean that it is not open to criticism. The reason I have such an interest in it is because it solved a lot of what I felt were outstanding problems in my own model building efforts, but it certainly raises other questions. In the first paragraph of The Presence of the Past, Rupert condenses the theory into a slogan which could be shouted in a theater or a parade. It's that things are as they are because they were as they were. And that, in essence, is what this theory is saying. Well, now notice that this is as conservative a point of view as one could possibly imagine. The problem, if you believe things are as they are because they were as they were, then your problem is to account for anything new or novel ever happening. How, in a world where things are as they are because they were as they were, are you ever going to get creative advance? It seems to preclude it from the outset. Well, what drew me originally to Rupert, or what drew us together, was I had a theory that was entirely about accounting for novelty. And that was what it delivered on, was a model of how new things could come into being. Rupert's theory is a model of how structure is conserved and perpetuated through time. So my thought was you could bring these together, and if they were not mutually exclusive, then you would find out why there was persistence of form, why there was this overwhelming presence of the past, and yet why there could still be apparently free will and novel situations arise. And you really participate, when you participate in this idea, in an intellectual adventure upon which the curtain has only risen. No one can stride to a blackboard this afternoon, this evening, and write the equations of the morphogenetic field. We are a long, long way from that. This is basically at the level of parlor room discussion. But if the morphogenetic field is written, then if the equations are written, then it will flower into who knows what, in the same way that when the electromagnetic equations were finally written by Clerk Maxwell, suddenly radio, television, all of these things became a possibility. I think that accounting for form is the great unsolved problem that science has put off for about 500 years. Accounting for novelty is a somewhat newer problem that is not even addressed by science until you get to the theory of evolution in the 1850s, and then only addressed in the biological realm. The theory that I originally elaborated had novelty as the downsloping part of a fractal wave, and the upmoving part of that wave I called entropy or disconnectedness, or I can't even remember. And it was Rupert who said you should call it habit. And you should see then that the world is an ebb and flow of habit versus novelty, of temporal situations of varying durations in which the presence of the past is so overwhelming that that basically the past is replayed in that space-time domain. And yet there are other space-time domains where the way in which causality and formative causation come together creates novel connection. And these novel connections come into being with